Have you ever wondered what truly built America? Not the land, not the flag, but the minds behind it. The dreamers, the rebels, the thinkers. Men who shaped not just a nation, but a political tradition that still defines who we are today. From Jefferson's idealism to Lincoln's moral vision, from Roosevelt's bold energy to the cold calculations of power, America was never just a story of freedom. It was a story of conflict, ideas, and ambition. Richard Hofstadter, one of the most brilliant historians of the 20th century, looked beyond the myths and showed us the real faces of American politics, the contradictions, the beliefs, and the human struggles behind every great decision. This is the story of the American political tradition and the men who made it. A story not just about history, but about who we've become. Chapter 1. The Myth of the Founding Fathers. They called them Founding Fathers, men of vision, men of virtue, the architects of a nation built on freedom, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the story we were told. But Richard Hofstadter, he asked a question few dared to ask. What if the truth was never that simple? When America was born, the dream was powerful, but so were the ambitions behind it. The men who signed the Declaration of Independence believed in liberty, but they also believed in their own interests. George Washington, a man of honor, but also a man of property. Thomas Jefferson, the voice of equality, but an owner of slaves. Alexander Hamilton, a champion of strong government, but one who distrusted the very democracy he helped create. They were not gods writing scripture. They were men, flawed, brilliant, ambitious men who carried within them both light and shadow. Hofstadter saw it clearly. He wrote that the Founding Fathers didn't just fight for freedom from Britain. They fought for control over the new world that freedom created, to protect property, to secure power, to design a system that balanced liberty with order, and often privilege with fear. They believed in the people, but not always in all the people. The new republic was built on ideals that soared high, yet rested on foundations that were deeply unequal. Still, from this contradiction came something extraordinary: a living, breathing democracy, strong enough to question even its own beginnings. That's what makes America unique. Not the perfection of its founders, but the courage to confront their imperfections. Because every generation that came after, from Lincoln to Roosevelt, had to wrestle with the same tension: freedom versus power, idealism versus interest, justice versus reality. And that struggle, that eternal conflict between what we believe and what we do, is the true American tradition. Chapter 2. Thomas Jefferson, the contradictory idealist. He wrote the words that changed the world: all men are created equal. But even as Thomas Jefferson's pen moved across that parchment in 1776, a quiet truth stood behind him. Hundreds of enslaved men and women who would never know that equality. Jefferson was a mystery even to himself, a man who dreamed of freedom, yet lived surrounded by chains. A thinker who imagined a nation of independent farmers, yet relied on the labor of others to keep his own fields alive. Richard Hofstadter called him the most paradoxical of all the founders. Because Jefferson wasn't just a politician, he was a philosopher of contradiction. He loved liberty, but feared chaos. He hated tyranny, but doubted the wisdom of the masses. He wanted power in the hands of the people, yet when power reached too close, he pulled it back. In Jefferson's world, freedom was beautiful, but fragile. He saw democracy not as a right for all, but as a delicate experiment that only the virtuous could handle. He believed in the goodness of man, as long as that man looked like him, thought like him, and fit his idea of the citizen. Yet even with all his contradictions, Jefferson left behind something profound, an ideal that refused to die. Because those words, "all men are created equal," outlived the man who wrote them. They burned in the hearts of abolitionists, echoed in the speeches of Lincoln, and thundered in the marches of Martin Luther King Jr. Hofstadter didn't see Jefferson as a saint. He saw him as a symbol of America's eternal conflict, between what it says and what it does. Jefferson's life teaches us something hauntingly real, that ideals are easy to dream, but painfully hard to live. And maybe that's what makes him unforgettable. Not because he was pure, but because he was human. He built a philosophy that carried both light and darkness, and in that contradiction, he built America itself. Chapter 3. Abraham Lincoln, the moral politician. He came from nothing. A log cabin. A boy who read by candlelight. A man shaped not by privilege, but by pain. Abraham Lincoln was not born to power. He earned it, step by step, through hardship, humility, and a deep understanding of human sorrow. When the nation began to tear itself apart, Lincoln didn't stand as a warrior, he stood as a healer. But Richard Hofstadter reminds us, Lincoln was never a saint. He was a politician, and a deeply moral one. He believed in principle, yes, but he also understood the cruel math of politics. He balanced compassion with calculation, mercy with law, and heart with strategy. He didn't free the slaves out of simple idealism. He freed them to save the Union. Yet in doing so, he gave the nation its moral rebirth. Lincoln saw further than most. He knew that ideas alone couldn't hold a country together. Only understanding could. He spoke softly, but carried the weight of a divided people in every word. When he said, "With malice toward none, with charity for all," he wasn't preaching perfection. He was begging America to forgive itself. Hofstadter wrote that Lincoln's genius lay in his ability to turn politics into a moral art, to make compromise feel like conscience. He wasn't trying to be loved. He was trying to be right. And sometimes being right meant standing alone. On that April night in 1865, when the bullet struck him down, it wasn't just a man who fell. It was the fragile hope of a nation still learning how to live with its own ideals. But Lincoln's spirit, it never died. It whispered through the centuries, reminding Americans that unity is not given, it is earned, through sacrifice, empathy, and the courage to forgive. Lincoln was not perfect. He was real. And that, perhaps, is why his shadow still walks beside every American leader today. A silent reminder that morality and power can and must coexist. Chapter 4. The Gilded Age. Power in the hands of. The Civil War had ended. Lincoln was gone. And the promise of equality, the dream that had once burned so bright, slowly began to fade behind the glitter of gold. America entered a new era. They called it the Gilded Age. A time of railroads and factories, of invention and ambition, and behind it all, an empire built on money. The streets of New York shimmered with opportunity, but deep beneath the shine was something else: greed. Richard Hofstadter saw this age not as a time of growth, but as a time of disguise, because everything looked golden on the outside, while corruption quietly ate the heart of democracy. Men like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan rose from nothing and built empires. They became the new kings of America, not by birthright, but by business. But what was the cost? The working man toiled for pennies. Children labored in factories. Politics turned into a marketplace where laws were bought and justice was sold. The Founding Fathers had dreamed of a government by the people, but during the Gilded Age, it became a government for the powerful. Hofstadter described this as the moral crisis of success, because success had become the new religion, and wealth, its god. The American dream, once built on freedom and hard work, was slowly replaced by competition and control. The rich justified their privilege as destiny, while the poor were blamed for their suffering. And yet, in the shadows of this inequality, a new consciousness began to rise. Workers demanding rights, journalists exposing lies, and thinkers daring to ask, what is progress if it costs us our humanity? The Gilded Age wasn't just about money, it was about morality. A mirror held up to America, showing not what it wanted to be, but what it had become. And in that mirror, Hofstadter saw the truth. That power, once gained, rarely lets go without a fight. Because when democracy becomes a business, freedom becomes a product, and justice becomes a luxury. Every nation has two histories, the one that's written in books, and the one that's written in the hearts of its people. The story of the American political tradition isn't just about presidents and power. It's about us, about the dreams we chase, the truths we ignore, and the courage it takes to look at our own reflection. Richard Hofstadter didn't write to glorify the past. He wrote to make us think, to remind us that freedom survives only when we keep questioning it, that democracy doesn't die in silence and it dies when good people stop paying attention. So if you believe history still matters, if you believe truth still deserves a voice, then be part of this journey. Hit that like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to this channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we understand them. Because the past isn't gone, it's waiting for us to finally learn from it.